Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 2021 Ascend Staff Mock Round. This round is a showcase of all the amazing talent that we have on staff here at Ascend Speech and Debate, and we are beyond excited to show it to you today. Today, our staff is going to be debating a very simple bill, one you've probably seen debated many times before, which is to raise the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour. Before we get going, a couple of reminders. Regular registration for the Ascend Summer Camp closes today, May 31st. However, late registration will be made available. We offer affordable pricing, financial aid, and an unprecedented amount of flexibility to accommodate your personal schedule. For more information, visit ascendspeech.org. Now, to kick things off, I will pass it over to our special guest presiding officer, Ascend student and reigning California State Congressional Debate Champion, Sean Allin. Let's have a great round.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much, Henry. So thank you all for electing me to be your presiding officer for today's round. It's an absolute honor to compete with you all today. Since you're all very familiar with how this event works, I'll try to keep procedures brief so that we can get started as soon as possible. So first off, for calling for speakers, if you want to give a speech or ask a question when I call for one, just raise your hand clearly so that I can see it, and then that's how I'll recognize you. Then once I call on you during the actual speech itself, I'll be using color-coded time cards as signals. So once you've reached 2 minutes into your speech, I'm going to hold up a green 2-minute card. Then once you've hit 2:30, I'll hold up a yellow 2:30 card. Then at 2:55, I'm going to hold up this red 2:55 card that reminds you to please begin concluding your speech if you haven't done so already. Then once you've hit 3 minutes into the speech, I'll begin counting you down from 10. And then once you've hit 3:10, I'm going to hold up this red stop card that asks you to please end there. Since it's online, though, I get that there's going to be a little bit of lag, so I'll give you a few extra seconds of grace. But if you haven't finished your speech by like the 3:15 range, and that's when I'll have to verbally cut you off and then move to questioning. Please try not to abuse the grace period, but timing shouldn't be too much of an issue as you can all time yourselves as well. After your speech, we'll move to questioning. For questioning, it's going to be direct cross-examination. We'll have a 2-minute questioning period for the first cycle and then a 1-minute questioning period for every remaining cycle. I'll recognize all questioners verbally. So if I don't call on you for the first question, please just keep your hand up, and then I'll recognize the next questioner after the first block is done. And then during the actual questioning period, it's going to be 30 seconds per person. Once you've hit 20 seconds into the questioning block, I'm going to hold up this yellow 10 seconds remaining card to remind you to please wrap it up. And then I'll count you down from 5 seconds. And then once you've reached 30 seconds, I'll cut you off and then move to the next speaker. Finally, please try to keep this round fun and lighthearted. A lot of people are going to be watching this, so we all want to set a good example. So that about does it for my procedures. Does anyone have any questions regarding all that? All right, awesome. Seeing none, and seeing as we already have a docket of 1 bill set, I'll unilaterally open the floor for debate on a bill to raise the federal minimum wage. Is there a sponsor present? Okay, between those standing, that'll go to Senator Brown.
Howdy, everybody. This is Senator Brown speaking for the first and only time in this session, spelled just like the color for those curious. When everyone is ready, please let me know. American congressmen may be the most privileged employees in the entire nation. Each and every year, we have the chance to sign off on our own pay raises. While this incredibly convenient system has been enabled by our concern over inflation, 53 million American workers near the minimum wage have never had that luxury. Over the past decade, the 725 rate has forced Americans into stagnant wages and shrinking buying power. This is our chance to change that. First, before we break down the legislation, let's actually understand the problem. America's labor market is becoming dangerously uncompetitive. In the same exact way that goods and services in our market are designed to be strengthened through competition and cheapened, the same is absolutely true of laborers as well. In essence, when dozens of firms compete over employees, it drives up wages, enabling Americans to define the worth of their own work. The problem stems when those dozens of options don't exist. Labor monopolies have become increasingly prominent in the system. As the University of Pennsylvania furthers in December 10th of 2018, right now, the HHI, a measure of labor market monopoly strength, is at 3,100 in the United States, 26% higher than what our antitrust regulators use for defining a labor monopoly. The declining power of unions, the strengthening of non-compete disclosure agreements, and globalization have put immense power in the hands of just a few employers. As a direct consequence, minimal ability for employees to leverage their rights leaves them shackled to their desks, languishing in working poverty. As the Policy Link, a nonprofit economic research institute, furthers in 2015, over the past 3 decades, the amount of Americans in full-time poverty who work around the clock has increased from 7 to 12.4 million. The rags to riches narrative this Congress has peddled begins and ends with ruin. This is our chance to rewrite that narrative. Now, let's discuss this legislation's solution: providing financial protection for workers currently trapped within the system. If the market itself cannot provide corrective action, we need to step in by setting a wage floor, guaranteeing workers have adequate protection in the status quo. As the Economic Policy Institute furthers in January of 2021, right now, estimating the average cost of utilities and housing demonstrates that the average income a worker without children needs to make it in the United States is $31,200, a $15 an hour minimum that this legislation is going to guarantee. Overarchingly, representatives, let's understand something. Americans deserve a system that works for them just as much as they work for it. This legislation provides that answer.
Thank you for that sponsorship speech of 3 minutes and 12 seconds. Seeing as this is a first cycle speech, we're now in line for 2 minutes of direct cross-examination. All those wishing to question the speaker at this time, please raise your hands. Between those standing, that'll first go to Senator Rodriguez.
Hi, so a large focus of your speech are large corporations that act as monopolies in the status quo, but who employs the majority of minimum wage employees?
The majority of, so the 1.9 million minimum wage employees are generally employed by smaller enterprises in the status quo.
Right, would they be able to afford an over double minimum wage than the status quo?
There is going to be certainly some cut in employment, but it's important to recognize this legislation increases the minimum wage in a yearly increment,
But how does
giving
that
them the ability to adequately prepare their enterprise for this.
Hey, so labor monopolies are really strong in the status quo, right?
Correct.
And increasing minimum wage to $15 an hour is kind of expensive for them, right? For any business generally.
Exactly, yes.
So wouldn't that push them to retaliate strong, if they're already strong in the status quo, to retaliate more with things like automation or cutting of jobs and shifts?
So there is definitely going to be some pressure for things like automation and cutting labor, but in the overarching end of things, they're still going to hold on to some employees who are going to see stronger real income as a result of this legislation.
Thank you. Questioning time has elapsed. We still have enough time for 2 more questioning blocks. Would anyone like to take them? Senator Saxena.
So you talked about how the average income an American needs is $31,000, correct? Wouldn't that be different depending on where they're living?
Oh, absolutely, yes. I do think there needs to be more work put into a living wage that factors in those state differences, but the average across the country is 31,000.
Right, so if that's the average across the country, that's assuming that 50% of Americans don't need that much to survive. Why should we be increasing it if these Americans don't need it?
So even if it's not a necessity for all Americans, ensuring that any laborer
Thank you. Final question will go to Senator Jhawar.
Is something we need to guarantee.
Hi, Senator. Can you characterize the average minimum wage worker?
So in the status quo, exact minimum wage or near the minimum?
Exact minimum wage. So people that would be helped by this.
Exact minimum wage is generally made up of young adults, usually younger laborers who
how many of them are
generally are also low education.
How many of them are supporting a family off of
Pardon?
it? Not most of them, right? Most of them don't support a family.
It's not a lot of workers at the minimum wage supporting a family off of it, but near the minimum wage, you see that start to exist.
Okay, we're not raising near the minimum wage. We're raising the minimum wage, right?
Thank you. Questioning time has elapsed. Both speakers are thanked. We now return to mute. Seeing as that was a sponsorship speech and our first affirmative speech, we're now in line for our first negative speech. All negative speakers, please raise your placards now, or hands. Between those standing, that'll go to Senator Cox.
Thank you. That's Senator Cox, COX. Whenever my PO is good to go. Awesome. In a world of rapidly advancing technology, it is meaningless and even vindictive for this Congress to pass reform that does not offer protection. Protection for warehouse workers who have electricity to pay, but not enough shifts to keep it on. Protection for student workers who are thrust to the back burner and forced to stay there as prices rise around them with no way to match them themselves. Not protection for a few of our constituents, Senator Brown, protection for all of them. Please stand with me, fail today's legislation. First, fail today's legislation because it will drive automation and cost jobs. Restaurants and warehouses are predominantly low paying and highly sensitive to the wage increases proposed today. The Pew Research Center, January 4th of 2017 explains that about 18% of the near minimum wage jobs in the United States are in the food service and restaurant industry. Higher wages will force businesses to face undesirable options, which is just fancy wording for cutting staff, raising prices, and adopting automation. The Brookings Institute paper, January 2020, found that low-wage jobs are now being fully replaced by automation twice as fast as they were in 2008. Minimum wage increases directly correlate with an increase in unemployment. For example, Amazon recently announced an increase in their warehouse pay to $15 an hour for their workers. But what they do not tell you is that in the very near future, there will be very few actual humans working in their warehouses, and rather they will be replaced by robots. It is ironic that Senator Brown talks about how strong labor monopolies are in the status quo, because raising the minimum wage does not decrease their power, it forces them to retaliate harder with job cuts and increases in automation. We faced a similar problem when coal and steel left former workers with no way to feed their families or people dependent upon them. The next stop on this path are warehouse and restaurant workers meeting the exact same fate. But secondly, you also negate today's legislation because it discriminates against low-income students. Student workers are currently exempted from the minimum wage laws, which allow employers to hire them for a lot less while they work as part of their aid package. But today's bill increases those wage differences because the US Department of Labor website, Access October 10th of 2018, explains that these jobs are partly funded by the federal work-study program. They're designed to help low-income students afford college. AZ Central, February 6th of 2017, points out that after Arizona raised its minimum wage law, over 11,000 exempted students remain unbenefited and working for much less on campus. Not only is it not an option for these low-income students to find new jobs because then they would risk losing their entire aid package, but also they have to keep up with the inevitable uptick in prices that comes from a higher minimum wage. The sword of hope means nothing for our people if the shield of protection and stability does not follow soon after. Don't shoot our workers in the foot. Stand with me. Fail today's legislation.
Thank you for that speech of 3 minutes and 8 seconds. We're now in line for 2 minutes of direct cross-examination. All those wishing to question, please raise your hands now. That'll first go to Senator Medigovic.
Thank you. Is paying employees more expensive?
Yes.
Do businesses usually do better over time?
Well, it depends on the business and their business model, but
But
I guess if there's a good business model, sure.
So doesn't the problem of job loss just dwindle in the long run while the benefits of this bill keep growing?
If that were true, then we wouldn't see an uptick in automation and a decrease in jobs in the status quo.
Does automation create jobs?
It depends on what kind of automation you're talking about, but short term does not.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next question will go to Senator Glickson.
So minimum wage jobs are leaving already, right?
Yes.
If they're being replaced by automation now, what is the difference between losing your job today and losing it in 5 years?
You have food to eat now, or you have food to eat for the next 5 years. The difference is that we at least prolong the amount of stability that our average person or average constituent has. I think that automation is inevitable, but we should provide some protection in the short term.
So how does not doing anything provide protection? If automation is happening right now, shouldn't we raise some workers above the poverty line before automation gets even worse?
Thank you. Next question will go to Senator Chandan.
Thank you. Does automation decrease the number of jobs or simply change the composition of the types of jobs that are available in the market?
It means that minimum wage jobs that have low skill jobs will no longer be available.
But mostly just manual jobs, right? There's also minimum wage jobs that are cognitive.
Right, but most minimum wage jobs are low skilled jobs that can be replaced by automation.
Is there any evidence showing that the number of jobs overall will decrease?
Yes, I told you that from 2008, automation replaced twice as many jobs as we had in 2008.
Final question will go to Senator Mazumdar.
Thanks. So companies automate because they can make better quality goods for cheaper, right?
Yeah, or it's just like cheaper in general, but yeah.
Okay, right. But so why is that a bad thing? If the cost of production goes down and the price of the good also goes down, doesn't that mean more people can buy more goods?
It doesn't matter if the cost of the good goes down if you don't have money to buy the good.
Right, but you told us that automation is non-unique, it's inevitable, but automation also better quality goods. Why don't we prefer that over something
I just think that we should provide protection to the average person before we throw them to the gutter.
Thank you. Questioning time has elapsed. Both speakers are thanked and may now return to mute.
Thank you.
Since that was our first negative speech, we're now in line for our second affirmation speech. All those wishing to give the speech, please raise your hands now. Between those standing, that'll go to Senator Glickson.
I thank the chair. Just give me a thumbs up when you're ready. Thank you. This past year has taught a lot about worth. When the pandemic hit, we realized the worth of millions of unseen healthcare workers. When our city shut down, the worth of millions of essential workers. And when we struggled, the worth of the government to fill in those gaps. But as our world returns to normal, I fear our realization of the worth of hardworking Americans to support our country is going to pass too. Pass to build a more prosperous future for all Americans. First, let me explain how we can both free Americans from poverty when Senator Cox claims that Americans will lose jobs if employers have to pay more. This is based in a fundamental misunderstanding of the minimum wage altogether. In reality, most people don't even earn the minimum wage. Minimum wage is the absolute rock bottom, the wage floor that Representative Brown talks about. Most workers float above it. Raising the floor means that you raise the poorest of the poor, lifting people out of poverty, but affecting most people's wages not at all. And David Cooper at the Economic Policy Institute in April of 2017 explains, while 30 to 40% of workers in states without a $15 minimum wage are stuck in low-wage jobs, only 4% of them actually earn $7.25 an hour or less. So even in states that have a less than $15 minimum wage, most people don't make $7.25, meaning passing isn't going to lay them off because their wages won't be changed. What it will do is raise the poorest workers, the people who make the bare minimum. Representative Cox has a logical fallacy embedded in her argument by explaining automation is both already happening and we should evade it. It's the inevitable future. What we should do is take people who are at the rock bottom of the wage pool and raise them up by lifting the minimum wage. Lifting them out of poverty is the difference between being homeless or housed, starved or stuffed, and literally in a pandemic, dead or alive. But the reason the negation is even worried about layoffs is ironic too, because passing creates the type of economy where the private sector is held responsible for their job, which is employing and paying people. In the status quo, we let the private sector pay an unlivable wage, and then we end up footing the bill for it. Finally today, we are shifting the responsibility of private labor cost from government welfare to the private sector. And that is a good thing. As Ken Jacobs at the UC Berkeley Center for Labor and Education explains in January of 2021, in states without a $15 minimum wage, 40% of those workers rely on public support systems because they don't earn enough. So companies profit because labor is cheap, but then as Representative Brown explains, workers don't have the choice to leave, and we end up paying what their wages should be in the form of welfare programs. In fact, as the Economic Policy Institute furthers in January 26 of 2021, in states without a $15 minimum wage, almost half of all welfare spending is on those workers, costing us more than $107 billion a year. Look, I'm happy to help Americans who hit genuine hard times, but I am not happy to prop up cheap companies using welfare programs at the cost of our taxpayers. It shouldn't have taken us a pandemic to realize the worth of workers who uphold our society. Cheer them on all you want, but the real cheer is to raise their paychecks.
Thank you for that speech of 3 minutes and 12 seconds. We're now in line for 1 minute of direct cross-examination. All those wishing to question the speaker at this time, please raise your hands or placards now. That'll first go to Senator Faraj.
Hi, so at every level of wage, there's a certain demand of workers and a certain supply of workers, right?
Yes.
So if we specifically isolate those lower income workers who are earning the bare minimum, doesn't this still mean that increasing the wage is disproportionately going to displace those people?
What it's going to do is put them in the same category as people who earn $13, $14, $15 an hour in comparable
Those people,
jobs.
right. So when we have more people inside that market and employers are not able to take in as many workers, how is this not
going to exist? The wages in those lowest paying jobs.
Next question will go to Senator Cox.
Hey, I agree that not a majority of our constituents make $7.25 an hour, but for those who do, the businesses that employ them, isn't it a large jump to go from $7.25 an hour to 15?
Well, first off, it's not even close to a majority. It's 4% of minimum wage.
I'm agreeing with you. I'm agreeing with you.
Secondly, they're not going from 7.25 to 15. It's an incremental increase, meaning that if you're a company, you have time to adjust, figure out where you need to move.
Regardless, it's still more expensive, right?
Yeah, and either way, like you said, they're going to.
Doesn't that mean that
raise people above the poverty line?
No protection.
Both speakers are thanked and may now return to mute. Seeing as that was our second speech in the affirmation, we're now in line for our second speech in the negation. All negative speakers, please raise your hand or placard now. Between those standing, that'll go to Senator Faraj.
I thank the chair, and just to check, is my mic okay? We're ready to go? Awesome. With that, my name is Senator Faraj, spelled F-A-R-A-J, and I'll get ready in just a moment. We're only 2 cycles into today's debate, and already the affirmation has found themselves bogged down in advocating for feel-good policy that's completely directionless. The affirmation may have flowery rhetoric, but the negation has the facts. We can't let today's debate be misguided by our emotions. Negate and we protect American workers. We need to understand that the core of today's debate lies in unemployment. At the most fundamental level, it's about whether or not the demand of labor meets the amount of labor that's supplied when we set a price floor like Senator Brown advocates for. The system works in a pretty simple way. When we see wages go up, more people are willing to work, and thus we have a bigger supply of labor. At the same time as those wages go up, employers are now willing to pay for fewer workers. Supply and demand for labor have to meet in the middle for higher wages to be effective. But today's legislation ensures that that doesn't happen, putting millions out of work. Now, Senator Cox was absolutely right about automation being the biggest displacement of workers, but it's actually more than that. We are making employment far more desirable and then making it way harder for people to actually find a job. A November 2020 report by Jimmy Hefter of the University of Michigan Journal of Economics explains that with a higher minimum wage, the quantity supplied of labor is now going to exceed the quantity demanded. So there's going to be a surplus of labor in the market, leaving as many as 335,000 Americans displaced in just North Carolina alone. Senator Glickson, your entire argument regarding layoffs not being unique doesn't stand, because even if we're moving into a new income bracket, the new minimum is where all of those jobs are going to be lost. So for the single parent working a minimum wage labor job just to put food on the table, they're going to be laid off and unable to pay for their children. The 20-year-old college student is just going to start accruing more and more student debt because no one is going to hire them. Senators Brown and Glickson, we need to realize that Americans would rather have a lower paying job than no job at all. But Senator Glickson believes that this is going to be okay because at least some people are benefiting. But this legislation will push the brunt of the burden onto the Americans who actually need our help the most, the exact people that Senator Brown and Glickson are advocating for. A May 2013 report by James Dorn of the Cato Institute finds that a 10% increase in the minimum wage leads to a 1 to 3% decrease in employment of lower skilled workers. For Americans who can't afford to attend a trade school or attend higher education, minimum wage jobs are their only option to survive. The affirmation advocates for a policy that allows employers to choose exactly which employees they want to lay off, leaving immense room for bias, racial and gender discrimination, and prejudice against low-skilled workers. We only harm the very people that we aim to help. We can't let the affirmation's emotions push us to pass misguided policy. Negate.
Thank you for that speech of 3 minutes and 5 seconds. We're now once again in line for 1 minute of direct cross-examination. All those wishing to question the speaker at this time, please raise your hand or placard now. That'll first go to Senator Sandel.
Hi, Senator Faraj. So will any jobs be opened up under today's legislation?
Yeah, so here's the thing. We're opening up jobs, but at a disproportionate level, we're also encouraging more people to seek out employment.
So how many jobs are we opening up under today's legislation?
Okay, I can't give you the exact number, but here's the comparative. What happens is now that we have a $15 minimum wage, jobs are more desirable than they are even now. So we're going to have way more people flocking to the workforce. And even if there's some creation of jobs, there's still not enough to fill that.
Who are all these people who aren't in the workforce but don't want a job?
Maybe people who are
currently. We'll go to Senator Brown.
Hi.
Thank you, Senator Faraj. Great speech. So, in regards to your model, you're assuming that businesses are already providing as many jobs as they can, right?
Right.
How do we know that's the case?
Because right now, if we wanted to increase productivity, we would simply hire more workers. But the thing is, a lot of people are already at the maximum amount of employees, especially smaller businesses.
But how do we know they're at the maximum? Have they suggested as much? What is actually supporting that claim?
Because they're not hiring more workers and they're still not as productive as they could be.
Those speakers are thanked and may now return to you.
Thank you.
Chair thanks you. Seeing as that was our second speech in the negation, we're now in line for our third speech in the affirmation. All affirmative speakers, please raise your hand or placard now. Between those standing, that'll go to Senator Medigovic.
Thank you. Assuming everybody is ready, I'll get started. Time flows constantly. It doesn't care about the people who are struggling. But that's why we exist, to pause and consider the needy. Ultimately, we affirm this legislation to stop focusing on the top and work on bringing the bottom up. First off, let's get something straight. Unemployment will happen. It's a question of whether or not the related benefits scale up to the drawbacks, and reality check, they do. In fact, Senator Cox and Faraj, the Congressional Budget Office in 2021 stated that by 2025, not only will all the unemployment caused by a minimum wage increase be halved, but 900,000 people will be lifted out of poverty. And by 2029, inflation that drove higher prices will return back to normal. In the long run, barely anything stands on the negation. Senator Cox also expressed her concerns over automation increasing from this bill. But even if that's the case, I wouldn't argue that as being bad. The Washington Post in 2018 reported that automation will create 58 million more jobs than it destroys. Sounds pretty good to me. Even better, income increases on net for the poorest Americans who are most likely to have a minimum wage, allowing hundreds of thousands of who are no longer unemployed once the economy stabilizes to, in particular, go back to school, letting them prepare for more cognitive jobs in automation, Senator Cox. Now, why is that so important? The US Bureau of Labor Statistics in 2020 revealed that going back to school increases income by 67% and decreases unemployment even further, since less educated people have the highest unemployment rate, currently standing at 5.4%. While the negation is trying to shelter the vulnerable, I'm trying to make them stronger. Secondarily, I'm going to make the case that even if you buy into all the harms the negation told you about, at their best, they still pale in comparison to the impact of prioritizing lives with government programs. Here's the deal. Increasing the minimum wage improves social services. The more people that escape poverty, the less that qualify for government programs like Social Security or welfare, meaning there's more to go around for everyone who still remains. In fact, the Economic Policy Institute in 2014 says that increasing wages to $15 an hour would cut the amount of people who still need social services in half. Now, everyone else who still qualifies can get double as much. Families who hurt the most deserve the greatest. This bill delivers. And anyone can guess why that's good. Better government programs protect more Americans. In fact, UC Berkeley in 2017 emphasizes how 80% of those who receive Social Security disability insurance get the majority of their income from it and saves 55,000 lives a year alone. Every time something as critical as these programs improve, the more families we can keep intact. Moreover, the National Institute of Health in 2011 finds that 162,000 deaths a year in this country were caused by lacking social programs, 172,000 from poverty, and 119,000 from income inequality, each poised to be alleviated by this bill when low-income Americans finally prosper. Senator Faraj could be right about all the fears of unemployment, but I dare anyone in this debate to find an impact more salient than immediate life and death. Speech after speech, you've heard the word poverty thrown around like a buzzword to represent suffering, but missed all of its meaning. It's empty fridges, hungry summers when school lunches aren't around, and the coldest winters when you can't afford electricity. Help families bask in the warmth of a better life, not the frigidness of our present. Thank you.
Thank you for that speech of 3 minutes and 15 seconds. We're now in line for 1 minute of direct cross-examination. All those wishing to question, please raise your hand or placard at this time. That'll first go to Senator Rodriguez.
So historically, when there's a less need for welfare, does all of the funding for welfare programs just stay there?
It gets reallocated somewhat, but people get more benefits when there's less people who qualify.
Well, if less people are qualifying for it, inherently, doesn't that mean that the amount of money in those programs is cut?
Until we redo the budget, no.
In the next fiscal year, it would be though, right?
Yes, but if it continues to decline.
But how does the quality improve if the money in it decreases?
In the interval of time between that happens.
It's a 1 year interval.
Senator Jhawar.
Hi, Senator. In Senator Faraj's Cato report, they said that a fair elasticity is for every 10% increase in the minimum wage, there's a 1 to 3% change in employment. What was the elasticity in the CBO report you gave us?
I don't know it for exactly.
It's 0.04%. What's the difference between 0.04% and 1%?
I actually couldn't tell you. I apologize.
It's pretty big. How does that make the report fair?
Considering that we asked them to evaluate the entire country and gave them the resources to do so, it makes sense that it'd be pretty.
Yeah, but I mean, if they use a flawed metric, how is the evaluation fair?
Then why was it published in the first place?
Thank you. Questioning time has elapsed. Both speakers are thanked and may now return to mute. Seeing as that was our third speech in the affirmation, we're now in line for our third speech in the negation. All negative speakers, please raise your placards now. Between those standing, that'll go to Senator Jhawar.
Thank you. If anyone needs to know how to spell my name, it should be up on the Zoom screen. If you could just let me know when you're ready. Cool, thank you. Let me pin this. Okay. Through the gang musical chairs, American youth are taught that in a country which promises opportunity for all, the only path to success is taking it from others. The wealthy already hold every seat in America. All I ask from you today is to leave the disadvantaged a space to sit. So far, we know from Senator Brown in the affirmation that a minimum wage will raise people's incomes, and from Senator Cox in the negation that it'll result in layoffs. I agree with both of these, but the crucial thing that no one in this round has done is tell you who experiences which effects. Professor Joseph Sabia from San Diego State University explains that 2/3 of minimum wage workers live in households with incomes over 2 times the poverty line. This is what Senator Glickson is missing. Just because they don't make a lot doesn't make these workers the poorest of the poor. That's because, just like Senator Brown concedes, the average minimum wage worker is not the breadwinner. They are a 3rd or 4th earner that's still living with their parents. What does this mean? By raising the minimum wage, the primary group you are helping are people that already have more than enough money to support themselves. This kicks out the vast majority of the affirmative offense about helping the disadvantaged. Now, I am going to argue that the small remaining AF benefits do not even compare to the harms that they bring to those in poverty. This is where the neg has failed you. No one has characterized who exactly is losing their jobs. Ryan Bourne from the Cato Institute explains on February 25th of 2021 that the first to get fired will be the working poor that Senator Brown talked about helping. Why? They often lack formal education. They often have less flexible schedules. They're more likely to miss work or show up late due to lack of transportation. And most importantly, businesses are already biased and are looking for any reason to fire a poor person. Force any affirmative speaker who wants to refute this argument to deal with every one of those warrants. This is why Richard Burkhauser from the Southern Economic Journal finds in January of 2010 that minimum wage increases actually worsen poverty. The working poor are more likely to get fired than see any raise in their income. Senator Medigovic, scroll down in that CBO report. They themselves say that for every single person that gets out of poverty, another one of the working poor will get fired. Why does this beat the entire affirmation? First of all, it turns every one of their arguments about poverty, like Senator Glickson's and Senator Medigovic's about spending on welfare, because now you're putting more people into poverty. But secondly, most importantly, this is the clearest and cleanest link to how this bill affects the disadvantaged. Professor Mark Paul from Duke University writes in February of 2018 that the unemployed are 300% more likely to fall into the cycle of poverty. This is the ultimate harm of the affirmation. Today's legislation may try to widen the playing field by making each chair bigger, but that does nothing to help America if it comes at the cost of pulling seats out from under us.
Thank you for that speech of exactly 3 minutes and 10 seconds. We're now once again in line for 1 minute of direct cross-examination. All those wishing to question the speaker at this time, please raise your hand or placard now. Between those standing, that'll first go to Senator Glickson.
Okay, so you've given us both that the working poor aren't the people who are going to have their wages changed, and they're the first to get fired. If you aren't changing their wages, why are they the first to get fired?
I'm saying that they're not the majority of minimum wage workers. They're the minority, but the minority is getting fired, like your side is saying. I'm just saying that minority is the working poor.
So why, if camp counselors are the people whose wages who are going to change, would someone fire a home health aide? It's just not adding up that it's not the same.
No, I'm saying that in one job, if they hire both the working poor and someone who's not a member of the working poor are getting fired, and the one who's not is getting a wage raise.
Thank you. Next question will go to Senator Sandel.
Hi, Senator Jhawar.
Hello.
So I get Senator Cox's link about automation. That makes sense to me. But what I'm confused about in your link is why exactly are businesses going to have to lay off anyone under today's legislation?
Because like Senator Brown, Senator Glickson, and Senator Medigovic on your side all concede, it costs more money to pay each worker.
Is there any savings on a minimum wage increase? Any at all for businesses?
No, not for the business, because the business is paying more to each worker. Everyone on your side also conceded that.
Yeah, that's fine. They can concede whatever they want. But if there is a wage, if there is any type of savings, is that a reason? Would that change your thoughts on this at all?
No, there's no savings.
Thank you. Questioning time has elapsed. Both speakers are thanked and may now return to mute. Seeing as that was our third speech in the negation, we're now in line for our fourth speech in the affirmation. All affirmative speakers, please raise your hand or placard now. Between those standing, that'll go to Senator Rodriguez.
I thank the chair. Hi, everyone. My name is Christian Rodriguez. Rodriguez spelled R-O-D-R-I-G-U-E-Z. Whenever my PO is ready. Great, then I'll begin. The minimum wage was first established in response to the Great Depression, when President Franklin Delano Roosevelt declared that employers were abusing employees and that a higher wage was needed to make sure we got out of that recession. Now, here we are in the midst of a pandemic, and instead of us coming together to make sure workers aren't being ravaged by low wages, we are bickering over semantics. Let's do the right thing and affirm today's legislation. I want to address the last negative speaker, Senator Jhawar, who basically just reduced the entire minimum wage working class as being not the breadwinners and teenagers who really don't need a higher wage. I entirely disagree with this classification, especially considering minimum wage workers are not the only workers affected by this legislation, because the Brookings Institute explains on November 21st of 2019, 53 million Americans, or about 44% of the workforce, are considered low wage, the median being about $10 per hour. Here's the thing. The CBO study that Senators Medigovic and Jhawar were bickering about actually says that the workers that are lifted out of poverty aren't making the bare minimum like Senator Glickson said, but rather making just above the minimum that would see their wages also increased by an increase in the federal minimum wage. So guess what, Senator Jhawar? Even if the majority of people making that bare minimum $725 are teenagers who, are the third or fourth earners, the majority of people affected will be positively benefited. And that's not just the only thing. Let's look at the healthcare industry in this country and how people cannot afford it whatsoever. Brian Gifford from the Integrated Benefits Institute explains on July 30th of 2019, 1 in 3 low-income wage workers cannot afford healthcare in the status quo. Senator Jhawar, you are essentially telling these people they don't need it at all. So I want to tackle the largest point that has been brought up by the negation about unemployment increasing. There are 3 key reasons as to why you should not believe this whatsoever. First, past precedent. You can bring up as much logic and predictive models as you want, but the fact of the matter is past precedent shows minimum wage increases do not correlate with unemployment. A meta-analysis of over 37 studies from 15 years by Dale Bellman from Michigan State University on December 10th of 2016 found no significant effect on employment after a single minimum wage increase. Second, even if you think past precedents just, be ignored, consider the fact that when you pass today's legislation and actually increase the minimum wage, businesses are strengthened in the long term by ensuring employees are more productive. Because the Integrated Benefits Institute on November 15th of 2018 found that 63% of all lost productivity is due to avoidable absence of illness, which decreases by 10% with every $1 increase in the minimum wage. You are essentially solving a huge problem businesses have, ensuring they can hire more workers in the long term. Lastly, look at the morality of the situation. We are essentially telling low-wage workers their labor is not worth more than $7.25, that they are not worth a paycheck that can ensure they can afford housing, afford food, and afford to make sure their children don't grow up in poverty. Make the decision that isn't just correct, but moral, and affirm.
Thank you for that speech of 3 minutes and 17 seconds. We're now in line for 1 minute of direct cross-examination. All those wishing to question the speaker at this time, please raise your hand or placard now. Between those standing, that'll first go to Senator Mazumdar.
Thanks. How are businesses strengthened?
So as I explained, a big reason why businesses are losing productivity is from avoidable absence of illness because workers just can't afford healthcare. That decreases by 10% with every $1 increase in minimum wage.
How often does a robot fall ill?
So as it's already been explained, automation is going to happen regardless if you pass or fail.
So what you just told me is that businesses are becoming more productive regardless because they're automating. So why should I buy this impact about businesses getting more productive?
You can be productive in more than one way. Automation isn't the only way to do that.
But if it's the best way to do so, why won't they prefer
I
it?
just disagree with that.
Senator Cox.
Hey, I agree that automation is inevitable. My question is, what do you do in the short term? Because I agree it helps in the long term, but what do you do in the short term for the breadwinner, as you explain, are the people who have minimum wage jobs or near minimum wage jobs who no longer can provide for their family? What protection does today's legislation offer?
So I think the misconception with that question is automation isn't a short-term thing. It requires a lot of time.
I agree with you.
To properly transition. So
I agree with you. My question is what protection?
We don't need to worry about that because
term.
automation requires a lot of.
So we don't have to worry about people starving.
Thank you. Questioning time is elapsed. All speakers are thanked and may now return to mute. Seeing as that was our 4th speech in the affirmation, we're now in line for our 4th speech in the negation. All negative speakers, please raise your hand or placard now. That'll go to Senator Saxena.
I thank the chair. I'm just pulling up a timer really quick. All right, cool, and everyone can hear me? As a Congress, we didn't come here to fear the future. Rather, we came here to write it. But here's the thing, in trying to write a better financial future for all Americans, we've lost sight of the real nuances behind the minimum wage and the Americans that live under it. Let's finally understand those nuances and understand how if we actually live in a world of reality, that our only option is to negate. Mr. Brown starts today's debate by explaining how labor monopolies have made it so Americans don't have the collective power to make them increase their wages in order to attract employees. But here's the thing, even if that might be the case, and the state governments have still acted, and that's because state governments have already begun increasing their minimum wages. As Forbes explains in 2021, 20 states have already increased their minimum wage gradually, with California, Florida, Illinois, Massachusetts, and others increasing to $15 an hour. But why is it so bad to unilaterally increase a minimum wage? Mr. Brown, just because the average cost of living is $31,000, that doesn't mean we should unilaterally increase it to that minimum, because the cost of living isn't uniform across America. That means that wages should be proportional to the cost of living rather than a federal rate. As the Business Insider explains in June 2019, in Arkansas, the median monthly rent is $950, and the minimum wage is $9.25. In Massachusetts, where the median monthly rent is $2,250, the minimum wage is increasing to $15 an hour. Ultimately, states set their own minimum wages because they know the cost of living. Mr. Brown, state governments have already acted to make sure that the Americans who do need more money are receiving that increase. But what happens when we increase the minimum wage above the cost of living? The exact opposite of Mr. Medigovic's argument, where he argues that increasing the minimum wage improves social services because more people will be able to escape poverty. The flaw with that argument lies in this cost of living analysis. When we increase the minimum wage above the cost of living to a level that these small businesses can't sustain, those same employees won't escape poverty, rather, they'll just be jobless. Let's finally merge that with Ms. Cox's, Mr. Brown's, and Ms. Glickson's argument. Mr. Brown, Ms. Glickson just told us that only 4% of workers make the exact minimum wage in a time of unprecedented labor walkouts. Those same monopolies that you were so concerned about have realized that unless they pay a living wage, they will have no one to work those jobs. So let's center around that 4% statistic. Those workers are working for businesses that at the end of the day only care about maximizing their profits. When that's the case, for those 4% of workers, Ms. Glickson, their jobs are turned over to automation, and every single impact that Ms. Cox about becomes true. This Congress is the most privileged group of employees in the nation, but that doesn't mean we should use our privilege just to forget about the nuances and the realities of the Americans we represent. Fail.
Thank you for that speech of 3 minutes and 6 seconds. We're now once again in line for 1 minute of direct cross-examination. All those wishing to question the speaker, please raise your hand or placard now. Between those standing, that'll first go to Senator Medigovic.
Thank you. Is everybody going to lose their jobs, or is it just some?
It's, again, just those 4% of workers that Ms. Glickson talked about.
And the worry is small businesses having to tackle this problem?
The small businesses, if they're paying $7.25 an hour, then it's pretty assumable that they can't afford anything greater than that.
CNBC in 2020 did a survey that revealed that 57% of small businesses laugh at a minimum wage increase.
Right, here's the thing, if they actually laugh at a minimum wage, then why are they paying the minimum wage? If they want to increase the minimum wage, they don't need the federal government standing over their heads telling them to do so. They can do so themselves if the benefits will actually be that great.
Thank you. Next question will go to Senator Glickson.
All right, so imagine for a second, can be hard as a senator, that you're someone who is living in cyclical poverty. Why is $200 extra from a minimum wage increase over the course of months a bad thing?
It's not a bad thing for you, but it's a bad thing for the job that you're working for. Like you talked about how only 4% of workers actually make the minimum wage. If that's only 4%, it's because their businesses literally either can't afford to pay them more or care about maximizing their profits.
Or alternatively, some of those people just don't make more than $7.25 because no one's holding them accountable to. If I'm a small business and no one says the wage should be higher, why would I raise it?
If you know that raising the minimum wage
time has elapsed. Both speakers are thanked and may now return to mute. It looks like we resolved the audio issue. So just a reminder, we were in line for our 5th speech in the affirmation. So all those wishing to speak in the affirmation, please raise your hand or placard now. Between those standing, that'll go to Senator Sandel.
Okay, thank you. Now that we have those audio issues figured out, hopefully we'll be good on this one. Okay, everybody ready? Great. It has been said that the beauty of American democracy lies in the idea that Congress does not dictate how anyone has to live their life. In theory, this is true, but reality paints a different picture. Our callous attitude towards workers' wages has ensured the idea of just trying to survive has become a way of life for millions of Americans. That's not what we were supposed to be, but it's not what we have to remain. Let's empower our constituency as we were always supposed to. Let's raise the minimum wage. Senator Jhawar champions the negation by calling out concessions from Senator Brown, Medigovic, and Glickson. They claim that there's no savings for businesses from affirming. Let's see how that just isn't true. First, an affirmation victory won't lead to increased costs that the negation talks about. Senator Jhawar and Saxena, you tell us there's no savings, but a report from data analysis firm Gusto reports that extremely high turnover in the status quo has led to exorbitant costs from retraining, advertising, and losses in productivity. It goes on to state that a $15 minimum wage saves small businesses on average $30,000 per year because people no longer jump from job to job. This nullifies any increased payroll costs, meaning everything Senator Brown told you about poverty rings true even more than it did during the sponsor. But even if some layoffs remain, you still affirm because the voluntary job loss would open jobs for anyone laid off. Senator Jhawar, don't let corporations hold us hostage. Small businesses will be fine. Which brings me to my next point. Voluntary job loss protects workers' health. Senator Faraj, you say the supply of jobs goes down, leaving many unemployed. This just isn't true, mainly because you ignore jobs opened up after an affirmation victory. The Economic Policy Institute explains in April of 2018 that the reason why the unemployment rate rises is because over 10 million people work with 2 full-time jobs just to survive. But with a $15 minimum wage, most will only need one. Senator Faraj, take this voluntary job loss into account, and the predicted unemployment rate increase falls by 1,000%. When these Americans no longer have to make the choice between being overworked and exhausted or underpaid and malnourished, it can be life-saving. The American Journal of Public Health confirms this in March of 2016, finding that a $15 minimum wage would have prevented 1,400 annual premature deaths in New York City alone. Lastly, the negation doesn't even attempt to prove that the current minimum wage is enough for anyone to survive off of. It's a blatant concession of the most basic part of today's debate. Instead of debating the merits of a higher minimum wage, they debate potential side effects. This isn't merely economics. This is about congressional power. Senator Cox, show me a reason to defeat this bill that can't be easily addressed by congressional action. Don't negate a good idea because the thing's in our control. We are the legislative branch. It's time we legislate. It is true that our constituents should be empowered to live the life they want to, but we must realize that the economic restraints we place on them are just as powerful as any legal ones we could put forth. Let's turn theory into reality. Let's raise the minimum wage.
Thank you for that speech of 3 minutes and 1 second. We're now in line for 1 minute of direct cross-examination. All those wishing to question the speaker at this time, please raise your hand or placard now. Between those standing, that'll first go to Senator Faraj.
Hi, so you said there's about $30,000 in savings for a small business from all of these like higher productivity, less turnover, right? So if they're paying about $10,000 more every year for every single one of their employees, because now they have to meet the new minimum wage, doesn't that mean that they still will have a loss, ultimately like a net loss?
So yeah, for the most part, it's completely nullified. Most small businesses
can you weigh that to me?
Don't have. Can I finish?
Go ahead.
Can I finish answering? Most small businesses don't actually have a ton of employees, but even if so, we open up so many jobs.
So they can only pay 3 more employees. The rest don't get it.
Thank you. Next question will go to Senator Jhawar.
Hi, Sandel. So the main link that you have for turnover is that people are jumping from job to job, right?
Yeah, over 70% of all small business employees or minimum wage employees are going to leave their job within that year trying to seek higher wages.
Okay, in the context of people that are breadwinners for their family, they obviously can't just leave that job. So how does this apply to those people?
So what I thought was interesting is one of the fastest growing group of minimum wage earners in the status quo, according to the Economic Policy Institute, is breadwinners themselves. This is an old myth that you're debating. It's something from the past. It's not the case anymore, and it's certainly going to keep changing if we keep the minimum wage where it is.
Thank you. Questioning time has elapsed. Both speakers are thanked and we now return to mute. Seeing as that was our 5th speech in the affirmation, we're now in line for our 5th speech in the negation. All negative speakers, please raise your hand or placard now. That'll go to Senator Mazumdar.
Thank you. Yeah, that's Mr. Mazumdar. Let me know when you're ready. Okay. If you've ever watched a classic coming-of-age movie from the 80s, you're familiar with the main tropes. A predictable storyline, a high school romance, and of course, a summer job paying minimum wage. The affirmation frames this bill as movie magic, but we've seen how this plot ends. Not every worker gets a happy ending. Let's roll back the tape on today's debate and understand why failing this bill is our only choice. From Senator Medigovic to Senator Brown, the affirmation has systematically misunderstood how employers actually value labor. And Senator Glickson is the best example of this. She says that because the minimum wage applies to the poorest Americans, increasing it will raise those poor Americans up. Here's the thing. While this bill raises their wages, it doesn't raise their skills. So if you make someone more expensive, but don't raise their skills at all, they'll be fired. And that's damning for the affirmation. The same price floor that Senator Brown champions is the reason to fail. Because when you affirm, if your labor isn't worth $15 an hour, then you won't have a job. It's that simple. And that's why Iowa State University finds that the vast majority of economic studies over the past 75 years have all concluded that raising the minimum wage will lead to unemployment by pricing out. Senator Brown says that gradually increasing the minimum wage will offset this mass unemployment. The Congressional Budget Office disagrees because in 2014, they found that even a $3 increase in the minimum wage gradually over time would cost 500,000 jobs in the first 2 years alone. Imagine what happens when we attempt an $8 rise. The results would be disastrous. Now let's roll out the red carpet for the affirmation and understand why their arguments just don't stand up. Senator Rodriguez, you say that businesses are strengthened, ensuring that employees will be more productive because they won't get sick because they're getting paid more. I agree, businesses want to be productive, but paying workers $8 above what their labor is actually worth is very unproductive. I highly doubt they'll spend time to retrain these people and make sure they're healthy. They're more likely to just fire them and get a robot to do their job for free. Senator Medigovic, you say that we free up more funds and increase welfare spending. That only happens if we raise people out of poverty. But the opposite is true, because by pricing low-skilled workers out of the job market, we lose more than 500,000 jobs every 2 years. So if anything, this bill will increase the amount of Americans that are reliant on welfare, but keep welfare funds stagnant, slashing the quality of food stamps and temporary assistance. So your impact falls to the negation. That leaves Senator Sandel. I agree that $7.25 is not enough to live on, but I value employment over wages. Even if we buy every affirmation impact, only 2.3% of people earning minimum wage will be paid more. And while that 2.3% may be paid off, nearly 30% of low-skilled workers might be laid off. I showed you that 500,000 workers lose their jobs, healthcare, and insurance every year under this policy. Senator Cox told you that those who aren't displaced now will be pushed out through automation. And Senator Jhawar explained how we aren't helping those who need it the most. Value all of these over marginal affirmation benefits. This bill might look good from the box seats, but for everyday Americans, it sets the stage for destruction. Strike down this bill.
Thank you for that speech of 3 minutes and 13 seconds. We're now once again in line for 1 minute of direct cross-examination. All those wishing to question the speaker at this time, please raise your hand or placard now. That'll first go to Senator Chandan.
Thanks. The studies that you utilized regarding job loss only look at loss, but what about the gains made from increasing the minimum wage?
If those gains are more than 1 million jobs lost every 4 years, I would actually vote with you on the affirmation. But unless
the affirmation told you that raising the minimum wage lifts millions out of poverty, raises jobs because automation helps get more jobs created, like Senator Medigovic told you, and overall increases productivity.
Right, but if you raise people out of poverty and also disenfranchise 500,000 every 2 years,
we'll go to Senator Brown.
Thank you. So you argue low-skilled workers will be phased out of the job market, correct?
Yes.
How many people with a bachelor's degree want to work at Jimmy John's?
I'm not sure. I don't.
Probably zero, right? Who is going to replace these workers if high-skilled workers don't want these jobs?
There are 30% of Americans earn less than $15 an hour. When you
Correct.
make
Who will replace
$15 an hour, they won't have a job because their labor isn't worth that.
Who will replace them? Where do employers turn to?
Higher equipped workers.
Thank you. Questioning time has elapsed. Both speakers are thanked and may now return to mute. Seeing as that was our 5th speech in the negation, we're now in line for our 6th and most likely final speech in the affirmation. All those wishing to give this speech, please raise your hand or placard. That'll go to Senator Chandan.
Thank you. Hi, all. That's Senator Chandan, Chandan, speaking on the affirmation, final speech of the round. Any indication from my PO when you're ready is great. Awesome. Thank you. Corporate CEOs don't know what it's like. They don't know working 40 hours of back-breaking labor. They don't know what it's like getting paid wages, but receiving burdening financial debt. But after hearing this debate, it seems like members of this Congress don't either. It is finally time to truly understand what America looks like. It's time to pass. 2 questions summarize this round. The first question is very simple. How does raising the minimum wage affect America's most vulnerable populations? As the last speaker of this round, the affirmation already made it undoubtedly clear that as those at the top get paid out in profits, those at the bottom are paying the price of injustice. Raising the minimum wage finally helps low-income Americans. Nevertheless, I have a few main responses that address the negation's concerns regarding job loss. First, the negation mischaracterizes studies continuously in this round. First, Senator Faraj's study assumes that businesses are already operating at full capacity, but Senator Brown definitely explained at the beginning of this debate that the reason minimum wages haven't increased is because of labor monopolies, not because business executives somehow can't afford it. Then Senator Jhawar uses a statistic about how low-wage workers are mostly teenagers, but the study only looks at those making the exact minimum wage. But those making anywhere from $7.25 to $15 also benefit from this bill, like Senator Rodriguez and I will tell you. Finally, Senator Mazumdar's study only looks at job losses, like I hinted in cross-ex, but more innovation, productivity, and people out of poverty outweigh his concerns. Second, the only big impact left from the negation is on automation, but the fallacy that Senator Jhawar and Cox both made is that automation, while changing the composition of jobs, doesn't lead to a net decline in the total number of jobs. Note that they couldn't provide a single empiric that proves otherwise. In fact, the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago conducted a meta-analysis in 2019 where they tell us that the typical high cost of job loss can be attenuated because automation of low-wage jobs also leads to the creation of similar paying jobs that mitigate that impact. This is not a debate about statistics, it's one of individual human suffering, and that's what we need to make clear. In fact, the National Low-Income Housing Coalition writes in June of 2017 that there is not a single county or metropolitan area in which a minimum wage worker can afford a modest home. For the single mother in Detroit who can't afford next week's rent to put a roof over her head, for the young adult working to break generations of poverty by paying for college, for the former convict trying to turn his life around. That is unacceptable. That's why you pass. The second question widens the scope of this debate. How does this bill impact economic output overall? The biggest concern comes from the negation, with Senator Cox and Mazumdar telling us that small businesses will cut jobs and struggle to stay afloat. 2 responses here. First, a survey from CNBC in 2019 found that a majority of small businesses can actually absorb the rise in labor costs resulting from increases in state and local minimum wages that occurred in January of 2021. But second, on top of being able to afford those wages, the National Employment Law Project in 2018 tells you that small businesses that pay these jobs don't just have less turnover, they also have fewer incidental payroll costs, more motivated employees, and higher quality of service. We make a living by what we get, but we make a life by what we give. That's why you pass.
Thank you for that speech of 3 minutes and 15 seconds. We're now online for 1 minute of direct cross-examination. All those wishing the question, please raise your hand or placard now. Between those standing, that'll first go to Senator Faraj.
Hi, great speech. So if these small businesses have so much flexibility and could just hire so many more workers like you insinuated, why did they have to close faced with like the financial burden of the pandemic?
I think the financial burdens from the pandemic are very nuanced rather than looking at the economy when it's operating.
But they were hit extremely hard at the very beginning of the pandemic, right?
Yeah, because you're not having the same economic output.
But that means that they didn't have any savings in the same time, right?
Yeah, because you're
so
not.
How can you say that they're saving so much and they're not employing to the full capacity if they didn't have enough savings to recover from the pandemic?
Those that are paying full minimum wage did better than those who weren't, even during the pandemic.
Thank you. Final question will go to Senator Jhawar.
Hi, Senator. So you say that the negation isn't considering people who aren't at the minimum wage but are in between, right?
Right.
Okay, none of our studies about unemployment are considering that either. If you have to raise all of those wages that are in between, that's also going to increase all of our unemployment figures, right?
Right, but what Senator Rodriguez told you is that right now there's about 50 million people who are in between there that are also benefited
And that's
by
what
that
I'm
rise
saying.
in the
If we
minimum.
raise that 50 million, that means the unemployment figures we're bringing up about increased costs also all go up, right?
No, we already explained to you that all of those figures about costs do not come into fruition, one, because of past precedent, and two, because small
But we're
business.
not thinking of who's in between.
Thank you. Questioning time has elapsed. Both speakers are thanked and may now return to mute. Seeing as everyone has now spoken once, the chair would entertain a motion to previous question. Is there such a motion? Senator Saxena.
Motion to move to the previous question.
Is there a second? It's been seconded. Are there any objections to this motion? Seeing no objections, we'll move to vote on the legislation. All those in favor of passing this bill to raise the federal minimum wage, please raise your hand or placard now, and then put them down when I call on you. So I count 1, Sandel, 2, Chandan, 3, Glickson, 4, Rodriguez, 5, Brown, and 6, Medigovic. All those wishing to fail this bill, please raise your hand or placard. I count 1, Faraj, 2, Jhawar, 3, Mazumdar, 4, Saxena, and 5, Cox. Any abstentions? There should be none since there's 11 of you. So on a vote of 6-5, this legislation does pass. My congratulations to the sponsor, Senator Brown. Seeing as we've completed our one and only piece of legislation on today's docket, is there a motion to adjourn? Senator Rodriguez.
Said motion.
Are there any objections to this motion? Seeing none, we're now adjourned. Thank you all so much for allowing me to preside this round. It's been a lot of fun. You guys all did great. We got through the absolute maximum amount of questions and speeches we could have gotten through this round. So great job, everyone. I'll hand it over to whoever wants the floor between Quest and Sydney. Okay, Quest.
Okay, thank you, Sean. We really appreciate you stepping in and presiding. And you did a great job as well. Thank you. Okay, to everyone out there who's still watching the recording and hasn't, turned it off, thank you for making it this far. We really appreciate it. I know I speak on behalf of the Ascend staff that is here and not here. We really appreciate your interest in the Ascend product, and we're super excited about the upcoming summer. We think it'll be way better than last summer, and last summer was pretty awesome, if I can say so myself. So if you have any interest at all, if you thought Rohit's refutations were great or Hunter Brown's speaking was amazing and you want to learn from them, you want to hear from them, you can sign up. We have late registration starting on June 1st. Early registration ends today, May 31st. Anyways, thank you again for watching. We really appreciate it. And from all of us, goodbye.